The Room That Erased Itself. Chapter 1. The Invitation. Evelyn Parker never planned to return to Greystone House. Nestled on the misty outskirts of a forgotten countryside, Greystone House loomed like a relic of a dream half-remembered. Beautiful, broken, and brimming with secrets. Evelyn had left it all behind a decade ago, sealing away the memories behind a locked door in her mind. But when the letter arrived, everything changed. It came without return address, slipped between bills and catalogs like a ghost. The envelope was thick, the kind used a century ago, and sealed with crimson wax pressed into the shape of an unfamiliar crest. Her name was written in cursive, so elegant it seemed carved rather than inked. Inside, a single slip of aged parchment, its corners frayed with time, bore only 5 words: "You are needed." Room 11. No name, no explanation, just a summons. Logic begged her to ignore it, to toss it into the fireplace along with every painful memory tied to that place. But something deeper, almost primal, stirred. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a pull, as if the letter had reached into her bones and whispered her own name back at her. By evening, Evelyn had packed a small bag, no more than essentials. She left a note for her neighbor, locked her apartment, and boarded the late train headed toward the countryside she hadn't seen in years. Through the window, the city lights gave way to endless fields cloaked in fog. Her reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar. Older, yes. Wiser, maybe. But behind her eyes was something she didn't recognize. Fear and a hint of hope. When she arrived, the cab driver refused to take her all the way. "No one goes near that place after dark," he said, refusing to meet her eyes. Evelyn had to walk the last mile. The gravel crunched beneath her boots as shadows stretched long across the path. Greystone House emerged from the mist like a memory solidifying. Its towering silhouette was just as she remembered. Ivy-choked walls, shattered windows like watching eyes, and a door that hadn't opened in years. The massive front doors gave way with a groan that echoed like a sigh. The air inside was cold, untouched by time or warmth. Her flashlight swept across peeling wallpaper and dust-coated chandeliers. The silence was thick, pressing against her skin, broken only by her own breath and the sound of her footsteps on marble. She knew exactly where room 11 was. Her feet moved before her mind could stop them, guiding her past the grand staircase and down the left corridor, the one she'd sworn never to walk again. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the house itself remembered her. Finally, she stood before the door. It hadn't changed. The number 11 still gleamed faintly in faded gold, untouched by time. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle. For one fragile moment, she hesitated. Behind this door was a past she had buried. Behind this door was truth. The doorknob turned with a click and the door creaked open. Darkness spilled out, swallowing the dim light from the hallway. Evelyn stepped inside, and everything she thought she knew about herself began to unravel. Chapter 2. Room number 11. The air inside room 11 hit her like a wave, dense, cold, and somehow aware. Evelyn shivered, though she couldn't tell if it was from the chill or something deeper. This cold wasn't natural. It seeped through her coat, wrapped around her bones, and whispered of forgotten things. She flicked on her flashlight. The beam landed first on the bed. A narrow iron frame, its mattress covered in yellowing linen. A single pillow sat perfectly centered, untouched by time or dust. The wallpaper, once ivory and patterned with faded florals, now peeled like shedding skin. Beneath her boots, the wooden floor groaned with every cautious step. Evelyn's gaze landed on a cracked mirror hanging above a small desk. It reflected her face in strange, fractured ways, as if her features didn't quite belong to her anymore. On the desk was an empty journal, its pages blank, save for one thing. The very first page held a line in the same handwriting as the letter. "Write what you remember, or what you've forgotten." Her throat tightened. She hadn't told anyone she was coming. No one could have planted this. Her fingers brushed the edge of the journal, and a strange energy pulsed beneath her skin, like static clinging to her fingertips. Everything else in the room, the shelves, the drawers, even the corners, was bare. It was as if the space had been intentionally emptied of all context, except her. She was the only piece that didn't belong, or maybe the only one that did. She placed her bag on the bed, and a jolt of cold shot up her spine as if the room didn't approve of the intrusion. She turned quickly toward the door. It was closed. Worse, it had locked. No sound, no click, no wind. Just the quiet finality of a boundary drawn. She rushed to it, jiggled the knob, but it wouldn't turn. She pressed her ear against the wood. Silence. Not even the groan of the house. "Hello?" Her voice came out smaller than she expected. No answer. The room swallowed her words like it had swallowed light. Evelyn took a step back and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress sighed beneath her weight like something exhaling. She looked again at the journal. It still sat there, open, waiting. She picked up the pen beside it and began to write. At first it was her name, then fragments of voices, laughter, a lullaby, a thunderstorm, the scent of lavender. None of them made sense. Some weren't even hers. She wasn't sure how she knew that, but she did. Memories that didn't belong to her spilled onto the page like ink from an unseen wound. Then came the scratching, a faint, slow, deliberate sound, like nails on wood. It was coming from inside the walls. Evelyn froze, pen still in hand. She wasn't alone, not anymore. Chapter 3. The door that locked itself. Panic clawed at her throat. Evelyn leapt up from the bed and rushed to the door again, banging her fists against it with frantic rhythm. She twisted the handle, kicked at the frame, tried to pull it open with everything she had. But the door held firm, like it had been sealed from the other side by more than wood and iron. "Let me out!" she shouted, her voice raw with desperation. The silence swallowed her plea. There was no echo, no sound of movement, not even the whisper of the wind that had followed her all the way to the house. Only her breathing, quick and ragged, filled the room now. When she finally turned around, something was wrong. The mirror had fogged up, not from warmth, because the room remained icy, but from something unseen. Slowly, faintly, shapes appeared in the mist. A fingertip had drawn a simple image on the glass, a key followed by a question mark. She stared. It hadn't been there before. Evelyn took a step toward the mirror. Her reflection shifted oddly with her movement, as if it lagged behind, watching. Then she noticed it, the bed. It had moved. Not by much, only an inch perhaps. But Evelyn had placed her bag on it, and now the bag had slid toward the edge, like something had nudged it. She turned sharply at the sound behind her. A breath, soft, barely audible, like someone standing close enough to whisper. She spun around. No one was there. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she stepped backward, nearly tripping over the leg of the desk. The lamp, the old rusted lamp she hadn't touched, flickered. Once, twice, then again. Its cord dangled, unplugged. Something was wrong with this room. Deeply, profoundly wrong. The mirror still stared at her, the key etched in fog, refusing to fade. Her eyes shifted to the journal. Its pages were no longer blank. New lines had appeared, handwriting different from hers. "You had the key, you gave it away." Evelyn's stomach twisted. She hadn't written that. She hadn't even picked up the pen again. She backed up to the wall, pressing herself against the cold plaster, trying to think. Every inch of the room was watching her, studying her, shifting when she looked away. And then the journal's page turned by itself. One word scrawled across the new sheet. Remember. The light bulb above her flared suddenly and burst with a loud pop, showering sparks. Darkness took over, and the breathing returned. Closer this time. Chapter 4, Unseen Corners. Evelyn didn't sleep, not really. She lay on the bed for hours, eyes fixed on the darkened ceiling, feeling the air pulse around her. The room no longer seemed still. It breathed, not in rhythm with her own, but in its own strange shifting cadence. By morning, or what she assumed was morning, Evelyn forced herself up. The journal remained open on the desk, untouched. The message from the night before, remember, still stared up at her in that elegant, chilling hand. Determined not to be passive, she began exploring. She touched everything, feeling for seams, for hollow spaces behind the walls. Her fingers brushed the edges of peeling wallpaper, tracing patterns that once meant something. She wrapped her knuckles along the wooden floorboards, listening for any change in sound. Every inch she examined felt slightly off, like the angles weren't quite right, like the corners stretched deeper than they should. Near the far corner of the room, beneath a rusted radiator, she discovered a small metal panel, square, barely the size of her palm. Curious, she pried it open. Darkness. It wasn't a vent or a crawl space. It was simply a black void, like the room had a hole in reality itself. Evelyn dropped a coin from her coat pocket into the opening. No sound, no clink, no echo, just silence. A deep, devouring silence that made her skin crawl. She sat back on her heels, unsettled, and turned her attention to another corner, the one nearest the mirror. The air there felt warmer, as if someone had just been standing there. She passed her hand through it. No one. Yet the feeling remained like the ghost of presence. As dusk approached, though she could no longer tell time, the atmosphere thickened again, Evelyn tried to sleep, curling up under the musty blanket, but the room wouldn't let her rest. The walls seemed to press closer, the corners deeper, wider. Breathing, she opened her eyes sometime later and froze. The ceiling was lower, not dramatically, but enough to notice. Enough that she was certain it hadn't been that close when she lay down. The floor had stretched. The far wall felt farther away. The dimensions had changed. The room wasn't just alive, it was shifting. Like it was adapting to her. Like it was learning. Chapter 5. The Mirror Without a Reflection. On the morning of her second day, Evelyn stood before the cracked mirror and froze. She blinked. Once. Twice. Nothing. The room reflected behind the glass. The desk, the bed, even the dangling light cord. But Evelyn herself was missing. It wasn't like the mirror was smudged or broken. It was clear as water. Yet somehow she was absent from it, like a ghost passing through a world that no longer acknowledged her. Slowly, she reached out and touched the surface. The glass was warm. Not just warm, pulsing faintly like it was alive. The moment her fingertips made contact, the mirror shimmered, and the image changed. A young girl appeared, sitting on the edge of the bed. She looked no older than 7 or 8. Her face was buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. Her long hair spilled around her like a curtain. Evelyn gasped. She didn't know the girl, at least she didn't think she did. But her chest tightened with a grief so sudden, so deep, it knocked the breath from her lungs. Then the image blinked away. Just like that, the mirror was empty again. Still no reflection, just blank, silent glass. Evelyn stepped back, hand trembling. Her mind raced, trying to explain it. A trick of the light? A memory surfacing? A hallucination born from stress and sleep deprivation? But none of it felt imagined. The day passed slowly. She tried distracting herself, cleaning, writing, even pressing her ear to the walls to listen for the scratching she had heard the night before. But every time she passed the mirror, it showed her something new. Once she saw shadows moving behind her, tall and elongated, reaching for her like smoke with fingers. Another time she saw the same room but without her in it, perfectly still, perfectly preserved, as if she had never arrived. And then, just after dusk, she saw a coffin. It lay on the bed, sleek and black. The lid was half open, empty. No sound came from the mirror, no context, just the image. Then silence. Evelyn couldn't look away for several long minutes. Her heart pounded in her ears. She approached the glass again, desperate for it to change, to give her something more, a clue, a warning, anything. But the mirror remained still, blank, emotionless. She realized something then. It wasn't showing her the future, and it wasn't replaying the past. It was showing her what the room remembered, and what it had erased. Chapter 6. The Diary with No Name. It happened late in the afternoon, after hours of pacing and silence. Evelyn was searching again, not because she thought she'd missed something, but because she needed to do something, anything, to drown out the weight of the room pressing in around her. She opened the desk drawers for the 5th time that day, her fingers moving half out of habit, half out of frustration. And then she saw it. A diary. It hadn't been there before. Bound in dark leather, smooth and cold to the touch, the book bore no title, no markings, nothing to indicate it had ever belonged to anyone. But the moment she held it, Evelyn felt the pulse of something old, something watching. She flipped it open. The pages were filled with writing, pages and pages. Ink faded with time but legible. The handwriting looked eerily similar to her own. Not identical, but close enough to raise the hairs on the back of her neck. Each entry began differently. Each told the story of someone else in room 11. Different years, different people. Some arrived alone, others were sent. Some remembered why they were here, others had no clue. But all of them shared one thing in common. As the days passed, they forgot. Their names, their memories, their lives. Some entries began with full paragraphs, rich with detail and thought. But as the pages turned, many ended mid-sentence. Others trailed off into scribbles or single, desperate words. The last word on more than one page, gone. Evelyn's throat tightened. Her hands trembled as she turned to one particular entry. The handwriting was neater, more composed. It described an arrival. Stepping off a late train, walking down a gravel road, approaching Greystone House, finding room 11. It described the letter, word for word. It was her letter, her story. But the entry was dated 50 years ago. She tried to tell herself it was coincidence, but her hands shook too hard to lie to herself. She grabbed a pen and flipped to a blank page at the back of the diary. Maybe if she wrote something, anything, she could assert her existence, anchor herself. She wrote her name, Evelyn Parker. The ink vanished. She tried again. Gone, as if it had never touched the page. No smudge, no trace. The room, it seemed, wouldn't let her leave a mark. Not even on paper. Evelyn stared at the diary for a long time, the soft sound of the pages breathing beneath her fingertips. She was beginning to understand. Room 11 didn't just trap people, it erased them. Chapter 7. Voices in the Vents. The house didn't sleep, and neither did she. That night, the darkness in room 11 felt thicker, like it had been stitched shut. Evelyn lay on the creaking bed, staring at the ceiling, too alert to drift off, but too exhausted to move. The silence buzzed in her ears until she heard it. Not whispers, not breathing. They slipped through the air like threads of sound, weaving into her mind from the old metal vent above the bed. At first they were faint, like static from a radio not quite tuned. Then they grew louder, clearer. Full conversation. Someone was crying. Another voice argued back, insistent and bitter, then laughter, high and broken. None of it made sense, not at first, until she caught the cadence, the inflections, the tone. They all sounded like her. Not copies, not impressions, variations. One voice was younger, another older, some cracked with sorrow, one was eerily calm. But they were all Evelyn. Different versions of herself, talking to each other through time, through whatever thin membrane separated them. She sat up slowly, heart pounding, and stood on the bed. Her fingertips brushed the grate. "Hello?" she whispered. The voices stopped. All of them. As if her presence had been noticed for the first time. Then, in unison, dozens of voices layered over one another, all her own, all slightly off, spoke the same sentence. "Don't let the room forget you." The grate slammed shut with a violent clang that shook the wall. Evelyn fell back onto the mattress, covering her ears as the metallic echo rang through her skull. It took minutes for the sound to fade, even longer for her hands to stop trembling. She stumbled to the desk and yanked open the diary. Her breath hitched as she turned to a fresh page. The room was trying to erase her. She could feel it. She wrote furiously, "I am still here." She waited. 1 second. 2. The ink didn't fade. The words held. It was the first time anything she'd written remained. A crack in the rules. A breach in the silence. Something had changed. Chapter 8. The walls that shifted. Evelyn awoke with a start, her body cold with sweat, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. She sat up, blinking into the dim light. The room around her was unfamiliar. It took her several seconds to understand what had happened. The room had changed. The bed, once pushed against the left wall, now sat squarely beneath the window. The desk, which always faced the mirror, was now opposite the locked door. The mirror, cracked and cruel, was gone entirely. The light fixture above flickered like a dying heartbeat. She stood slowly, knees trembling beneath her. This wasn't a dream. Everything had shifted, not just moved, rearranged. Rewritten. The journal. She rushed to the desk. She tore through the drawers. Nothing. She crouched to check beneath the bed, then scanned the dusty floorboards. The diary, the one anchor she had in this madness, was missing. A surge of panic rose in her chest. She ran to the door, hoping something had changed there too, but it remained locked, solid, cold. She turned in place, breathing hard, taking in the new layout. Every item in the room had shifted, as though the room had spun around her while she slept. The space felt off, tilted at angles that weren't natural. Corners she swore were there before had stretched or shrunk. It wasn't just rearranged. It had been redesigned by something. She approached the closet, its wooden door now slightly ajar. Evelyn didn't remember leaving it open. She hadn't dared touch it since her arrival. Her fingers hovered over the handle. Slowly, she opened it. Empty shelves. Except one. A single photograph rested in the center. It was old, the edges curled with age. She picked it up with trembling fingers, her breath catching in her throat as she studied it. It was her, younger, perhaps 20, standing in room 11, this room, but years ago. The wallpaper in the photo wasn't peeling. The wood was polished, the mirror intact. She looked happy, relaxed, smiling, holding the same leather-bound diary in her hands. She had no memory of this, but the photo didn't lie. It was her face, her hands, her hair. And behind her, barely visible in the reflection of the mirror, a figure, tall, shadowed, watching her. She dropped the photo as if it burned. It fluttered to the floor, landing face up. Evelyn backed away, heart in her throat. The room hadn't just shifted. It remembered something she didn't. Something it wanted her to see. Chapter 9. Midnight with Open Eyes. The clock struck midnight, and everything changed. It began with the lights. The bulb above Evelyn's head flickered violently, casting fractured shadows across the room. But this time the shadows didn't flicker randomly, they moved with purpose. They stretched and slithered across the floor like living ink, curling toward the bed, the walls, the desk, like the room was breathing faster. Evelyn pressed her back into the cold wall, knees pulled tightly to her chest. She hadn't dared to sleep. She didn't know what the room would do if she closed her eyes, but she was certain it wouldn't let her wake up the same. Or at all. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, but fear kept them wide. Clutched tightly in her hand was a shard of the mirror, the only piece she had found, wedged behind the radiator during her earlier search. Its edges were jagged, reflecting warped pieces of the shifting room. She held it like a weapon, a talisman, a last defense against being forgotten. Then the ticking began. She hadn't noticed a clock before, but now the sound filled the room, sharp, mechanical, relentless. It ticked loudly from somewhere unseen, and worse, it ticked backward. The second hand jerked against time, dragging the minutes behind it. The room dimmed with each backward tick until, finally, everything stopped. No sound, no movement. Even the dust suspended in the air seemed frozen mid-fall. Silence swallowed everything. And then the walls began to speak. Not with words, but with images. Flashes appeared across the surfaces of the room like projections from a broken reel. Evelyn watched in horror and awe as scenes played before her eyes, memories not her own, or perhaps ones she had forgotten. She saw herself entering room 11 as a child, younger than the girl in the photograph, eyes wide with curiosity, holding a stuffed animal that dissolved into smoke the moment she stepped over the threshold. Then again, she saw herself as a teenager standing before the mirror, angry, defiant, mouthing words with no sound, before slowly fading from the glass. More flashes. Each time, she left something behind. Her name, her voice, her shadow. Evelyn clutched the mirror shard tighter, its edge digging into her palm. The room wasn't just a trap, it was a cycle. She hadn't come here once, she had returned, again and again, like a loop stitched into the fabric of the house, a pattern. The room didn't keep her prisoner, it kept her part of itself. And now it remembered too much to let her go. Chapter 10. The Window That Looked Inward. Evelyn woke with a jolt, the air in room 11 sharp and dry, like paper ready to tear. The night's chaos had faded into a dull ache behind her eyes. Her body ached from sleeping on the warped mattress, but something else drew her attention. A window. It hadn't been there before. Set into the far wall, a place where only blank plaster had existed, now stood a tall, narrow window. Sunlight didn't pour through it. Instead, a dim gray glow filtered into the room, casting a hazy rectangle of light across the floor. She approached slowly, wary of another illusion. But this was no illusion. The window didn't look outside. It looked inward. Beyond the glass was another room, identical in every detail. The bed, the desk, even the scratches on the floorboards. An exact replica of room 11. And inside it stood someone else. Ellen stopped breathing. It was her. Not a reflection, not a memory, a version of her. Older, paler, eyes sunken with time and sorrow. The woman stood motionless, staring through the window with the same intensity Evelyn felt in her own chest. They locked eyes. Neither moved. The silence between the glass was more deafening than any sound. Evelyn reached out, fingers brushing the window pane. It was cold at first, then warm. Too warm, like skin flushed with fever. As her fingers touched the glass, her reflection fractured. The other Evelyn moved. Slowly, deliberately, she mouthed 2 words. "Get out." Then everything went dark. The window blackened from the inside, like ink spilling across a screen. Evelyn stumbled backward, a scream rising in her throat. As it escaped her lips, the entire room groaned. A deep, ancient sound, like the house itself was shifting. The floor beneath her feet shuddered. The air thickened. Dust exploded from the walls in a fine mist. She dropped to the floor, gasping, trembling, her scream still echoing somewhere inside her mind. She pressed her hand to the ground, trying to steady herself, but it no longer felt steady. The room pulsed beneath her like a heart under floorboards. She looked up again. The window was gone. Only the wall remained. Smooth, blank, as if it had never existed. And in that moment, Evelyn wasn't sure which side of the window she had truly been on. Chapter 11. The Memory That Wasn't Mine. The first time it happened, Evelyn thought she was dreaming. She had closed her eyes for just a moment, slumped against the wall after another sleepless night. But when she opened them, the world had changed. The room looked the same, and yet everything was different. She sat at the desk, but her hands were not her own. Rougher, larger, calloused from work or war. She wore a soldier's uniform, sleeves torn and stained with something dark. A letter lay in front of her, half written. Her hands trembled as they held the pen. "I don't think I'll make it home," the letter read. Then everything blinked. Evelyn gasped as she returned to her body, the sudden jolt leaving her dizzy. Her heart pounded as if she'd truly lived that moment. But it wasn't the last. The next time came with no warning. She turned toward the mirror, or where the mirror used to be, and in an instant she was someone else again. A woman, a mother, sitting in the corner of the room, cradling an invisible child in her arms, humming a lullaby, tears streaking down her cheeks. The melody was unfamiliar, but Evelyn's lips moved in time with it, as though she'd known it all her life. Then, darkness. She was back, herself again, but the sadness lingered, as if the grief had soaked into her skin. Again and again the visions came. A man pacing, raving at shadows that danced along the walls. A girl clutching her knees beneath the desk, whispering numbers to herself over and over. A writer scribbling in a diary before setting it ablaze in the sink. Each moment vivid, real, felt. When Evelyn finally forced herself to check the closet again, she found something she hadn't noticed before. A long, dusty coat tucked into the far corner. She pulled it out slowly, brushing off the layers of time. Inside the collar, stitched in faded thread, were the initials. Evelyn Parker. Her breath caught. She had never owned this, had never seen it, yet the fabric felt familiar. It fit perfectly. The room was showing her pieces of others, or was it showing her herself? That night, when sleep finally dragged her under, her dreams were not her own. She awoke weeping for people she had never met, and yet she missed them deeply. Chapter 12. The Floor That Breathed. At first it was subtle. Evelyn assumed she was imagining it, the way the wooden floor beneath her shifted slightly as she walked, almost like it had a slow, rhythmic rise and fall. But as the day wore on, she could no longer deny it. The floor wasn't creaking. It was breathing. With growing unease, she crouched down and pressed her palm flat against the boards. Beneath her skin, she felt a faint thump. Steady, deliberate. A pulse. The room had a heartbeat. Evelyn scoured the edges of the room, searching for answers. She grabbed a piece of chalk from the desk drawer and began marking the floor where she felt the pulsing strongest. Circles, crosses, small symbols. Anything to track a pattern. But every time she turned around, the chalk marks vanished. Gone, as if the wood had inhaled them. Determined to understand, she lay down, ear pressed to the floor. What she heard made her blood run cold. Voice, not one or two, but dozens, hundreds. They wept, they chanted. Some screamed, others whispered prayers or pleas. The sound didn't come from a vent or pipe, it came from beneath her, as if the voices were trapped below, echoing from the bones of the house itself. The floor didn't just breathe, it remembered. Driven by a surge of dread and curiosity, Evelyn fetched a metal rod she had found behind the radiator. She wedged it between two warped planks and pried upward. The wood gave way with a groan. What lay beneath was not insulation or crawl space. It was flesh, dark, veined, warm to the touch. She recoiled, gasping, her hand trembling from where it had made contact. The patch beneath the floor pulsed once, a slow, heavy beat, then stilled. She backed away, unable to look away from the open floor. Her thoughts raced. The room hadn't just been collecting people's memories. It had consumed them. She realized now that this place wasn't haunted by ghosts or cursed by history. Room 11 was something far worse. It was alive, and it was still hungry. Chapter 13. When the light refused to stay. By now, Evelyn had accepted that Room 11 didn't obey the laws of nature. It bent space, warped memory, reshaped identity. But when it began rejecting light itself, something in her spirit faltered. It started with the lamp. The bulb flickered out no matter how many times she twisted it in place. She replaced it with another, then another. Nothing. She lit a candle. It burned brightly for 2 seconds, then sputtered and died. Not from wind or lack of oxygen. It was as if the flame had been swallowed. The flashlight, her last reliable source, began flickering like it was afraid. Sometimes it would shine fully for a moment, only to dim again without warning. It pulsed like it was breathing in sync with the room. Evelyn resorted to natural light. She waited by the window, watching for even the faintest sign of the sun. But the sky outside had turned a permanent slate gray, and no rays made it through the thick, distorted glass. And then the darkness came. Not the absence of light, a presence. Pitch black filled the corners of the room and crawled slowly inward like ink dropped into water. It had weight, texture, intention. Evelyn sat still in the center of the room, clutching the mirror shard again, heart thudding. In that blackness, she saw it. Move slow, deliberate. Something crawled along the ceiling, barely outlined in the fading edges of her flashlight's dying beam. It had no shape, no limbs, a suggestion of mass that clung to the ceiling like a second skin. Then it moved down the walls. She didn't scream. She couldn't. The shape crept closer, slower now, and then it spoke. Not aloud, but in her mind. One word. Her name? Evelyn. Not a threat, not a warning, a plea. Sadness clung to the voice like dew. It wasn't here to frighten her. It wasn't even angry. It was mourning. The room, the entity, the thing that had taken so many. It was grieving them, feeling the weight of lives absorbed into its walls, its floor, its breath. And Evelyn, she was next. She sat in that darkness, unable to move, whispering her own name again and again, just so the room would remember her. Chapter 14. The Room That Forgot Me. Evelyn woke to silence. No groaning floorboards, no flickering lights, no whisper of her name in the dark. Just silence. She sat up slowly, but something was wrong. Immediately, undeniably wrong. The room wasn't hers. She looked around, blinking against the still dimness. The bed she sat on was too clean, the desk too plain. The wallpaper looked untouched, crisp and new. The mirror, now whole and mounted again, stared back at her, but not with recognition. The room was unfamiliar in every way. Even the number on the door was gone. The once faded gold 11 had been erased. Smooth wood where identity used to be. Her heart raced as she stumbled toward the mirror. She braced herself and looked. The face that stared back was her own, but blurred, distant. The shape of her jaw, the color of her eyes, the curve of her lips, all felt slightly off, like someone had painted her from memory and got the details wrong. She whispered her name aloud. Dublin. It sounded wrong, foreign in her own mouth, like a name borrowed from someone she had once known but no longer remembered. She spun around the room. The diary was gone. So was the photograph. The coat with her name inside vanished. Everything she had collected, every clue, every moment that had anchored her to reality, erased. Panicked, she grabbed a nail from a loose floorboard and scratched her name into the wall above the bed. Evelyn. Then she wrote it again, on the wood of the desk, on the mirror's edge, on her arm. Within minutes, the letters began to fade. First the wall, then the desk. Her skin, too, the ink bleeding into nothing, like water on sand. She screamed. It was the kind of scream that cracked open the soul, desperate, raw. But the room didn't respond. It didn't echo. It swallowed the sound. The room had stopped shifting. It didn't need to anymore. It had made its decision. It was erasing her. She collapsed into the corner, trembling, hugging herself like it might somehow hold her together. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and through them she whispered, "My name is Evelyn. My name is Evelyn. My name." The echo came once, then not at all. Chapter 15. The room that erased itself. Silence. No breath, no heartbeat, no Evelyn. The room stood perfectly still, untouched, undisturbed. The air was heavy, not with tension, but with vacancy. A strange stillness, like the world had paused around it. Room 11 was spotless. The bed was made. The mirror, whole and gleaming, reflected an empty room. The wallpaper, once tattered and peeling, now pristine. The desk held nothing atop it. The floorboards no longer creaked, no longer pulsed. They were silent beneath a varnish polish that betrayed nothing. There was no photograph, no coat, no diary, no trace. Evelyn was gone. Not missing, not vanished, absorbed, folded into the structure like a breath exhaled and forgotten. Just another layer in the wood grain, another echo in the walls. She had become part of Room 11, one of many stories erased and rewritten. Outside, the hallway stretched long and quiet. Dust danced lazily in the light that crept through tall, narrow windows. The door, once faded, now bore the number 11 again. Fresh, gold, waiting. It looked inviting. If someone were to walk past, a traveler, a wanderer, someone chasing the whisper of a memory, they might feel it. A subtle tug, a chill at the base of the spine, a lingering pause in their step. They might stop, they might listen, and if the silence was right, they might hear it. The softest sound, a knock, faint, measured from the other side of the door, then silence again. The door waits. The room breathes. The cycle begins anew. Room 11 is never truly empty. It waits. Always.